Hey everyone, tonight we begin with the delicate art of transforming secrets into silence, where a single crease could mean the difference between a lover's rendezvous and a political execution, and where your fingers held the power to seal fates with nothing more than paper, wax, and an intricate dance of folds that turned simple correspondence into elaborate puzzles of privacy and prestige. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn in your cramped apartment above the Rio de San Travaso, and already your fingers are aching. Not from arthritis, though at 32, you're starting to feel the early whispers of that particular curse of your profession, but from the memory of yesterday's work, 47 letters, each one requiring the precise choreography of folds that has taken you nearly a decade to master, and each one carrying secrets that could topple governments or start wars. The smell hits you first when you descend to your workshop, that distinctive cocktail of pulped linen, oak gall ink, and the metallic tang of sealing wax that has worked its way so deeply into the wood of your floors that you taste it in your morning bread. Your cat, a battle-scarred tabby named Cicero, weaves between your legs as you light the oil lamp, casting dancing shadows across the tools of your trade, arranged with military precision across your work table. Most people think letter folding is simply folding letters. They imagine you take a piece of paper, fold it in half, maybe add a blob of wax, and call it a day. They have no idea that you're essentially a paper engineer, a cryptographer, and a miniature architect, all rolled into one. The letter lying before you this morning, still sealed, waiting for your attention, represents hours of planning before the sender even picked up their quill. You recognize the paper immediately. Venetian foolscap, watermarked with the Lion of St. Mark, which means this comes from someone with serious money and even more serious connections. The weight tells you it's at least 4 sheets, unusual thickness, suggesting maps or diagrams tucked inside, but it's the folding pattern that makes your pulse quicken. A modified letter locking technique you've only seen 3 times before, all from the same mysterious correspondent who pays you in silver ducats and never signs their name. Your fingers trace the edges, reading the paper like a blind person reads faces. The outer fold is clean, too clean, suggesting the sender used a bone folder rather than working freehand. Amateur mistake. Anyone intercepting this letter would immediately know the sender had access to professional bookbinding tools, narrowing down the list of suspects considerably. You make a mental note to include this observation in your report to the Council of 10, assuming, of course, that this letter isn't from someone on the council itself. The first step in your morning ritual is examining the seal. This one's particularly interesting. A deep burgundy wax, mixed with what looks like crushed pearls, giving it an iridescent quality that shifts in the lamplight. The impression shows a coat of arms you don't recognize, but the style is distinctly German, possibly Habsburg territory. The wax itself tells a story, applied too hastily, with a slight smear on the left side where the sender's hand trembled. Fear? Excitement? Illness? You've learned to read emotions in wax impressions the way other people read faces. But here's where your expertise becomes crucial, and where the real artistry begins. This isn't just any seal. It's what you call a vulnerability seal, designed to break in a specific pattern if tampered with. The sender has mixed their wax with tiny fragments of mica that will shift and crack if the seal is heated and reapplied. It's brilliant, really, and it tells you this correspondence is worth someone's life. You select your thinnest blade, a piece of Damascus steel, so fine it's almost transparent, and begin the delicate process of seal lifting. This is surgery, not butchery. Too much pressure and the mica fragments will scatter, too little and you'll never get under the wax. Your breath creates tiny clouds in the cold morning air as you work, each exhale carefully directed away from your workspace. Even the moisture from your breathing could compromise the integrity of what you're about to reveal. The seal lifts cleanly, years of practice paying off, and you immediately press it into a soft clay tablet to preserve the impression. This clay tablet will go into your private collection, a secret archive of nearly 3,000 seal impressions that represents a decade of Venice's most sensitive correspondence. The Council of 10 pays you well for your discretion, but they pay you even better for your memory. Now comes the unfolding, and this is where your reputation as the finest letter folder in Venice truly shines. The paper unfolds like a flower, each crease revealing new layers of complexity. This particular technique is called spiral locking. The letter has been folded in a way that creates a continuous spiral pattern, with each fold dependent on the previous one. Unfold them in the wrong order, and the paper will tear along predetermined weak points, destroying the contents. Your fingers work with practiced precision, following the logic of the folds backward through their creation. First the outer spiral, then the inner locks, each movement revealing more of the hidden text. The sender knew their business. This folding pattern would take the average person hours to decode, assuming they could decode it at all. Most intercepted letters would be torn apart by frustrated spies long before they revealed their secrets. The contents, when finally revealed, are exactly what you expected and nothing like what you prepared for. It's a love letter, but not just any love letter. It's a love letter from Cardinal Bembo's nephew to the wife of the French ambassador, written in a mixture of Italian, French, and what appears to be some kind of personal code involving flower names. The political implications are staggering. The personal implications are even worse. You sit back in your chair, suddenly feeling the weight of what you've just uncovered. This single piece of paper could start a war between Venice and France, destroy 2 careers, and likely result in at least 3 deaths, including, quite possibly, your own if the wrong people discover you've read it. The woman in question is pregnant, according to the coded references, and there's some suggestion that the child might not be her husband's. But here's the part that most people never understand about your profession. You're not just a letter opener, you're a letter closer. Your job isn't just to reveal secrets, it's to conceal the fact that they've been revealed. The real artistry comes in the refolding, the resealing, the creation of a perfect forgery that will pass even the most careful inspection. You begin with the paper itself. 9 months of working with this particular correspondent has taught you their habits. They use a specific type of quill, swan, not goose, and they hold it at an unusual angle that creates distinctive ink patterns. They also have a slight tremor in their left hand that affects their letter spacing. All of this information goes into your mental database as you prepare to create what you call a ghost fold. The ghost fold is your signature technique, developed through years of trial and error, refined through countless near disasters. Instead of simply refolding the letter along its original creases, you create a parallel folding pattern that appears identical but actually follows a slightly different logic. The result is a letter that looks and feels exactly like the original, but will unfold differently for the intended recipient. This serves 2 purposes. First, it lets the recipient know their letter has been intercepted and read. Second, it provides them with a way to verify that the interception was professional, done by someone with the skills and discretion to minimize damage, rather than the work of amateur spies who might spread the information carelessly. Your fingers work through the refolding process, each crease placed with mathematical precision. The paper seems to remember its original shape, cooperating with your efforts to return it to its intended form. This is the meditative part of your work, the part that reminds you why you chose this profession despite its obvious dangers. The spiral pattern rebuilds itself under your hands, each fold locking into place with a satisfying whisper of paper against paper. You've added your own subtle signatures to the fold pattern, tiny variations that will be invisible to casual inspection, but will tell other professionals in your field that this letter has passed through your hands. It's partly professional pride and partly insurance. If this correspondence ever surfaces in a political trial, you want it known that you handled it with appropriate care. The resealing process requires even more delicacy. You've prepared a wax mixture that matches the original color and consistency, including the crushed pearls that give it that distinctive iridescent quality. The pearl dust alone cost you nearly a week's wages, but precision in your profession isn't optional, it's survival. You heat the replacement wax to exactly the right temperature, testing it on a scrap of similar paper until it reaches the perfect consistency. Too hot, and it will soak into the paper fibers, creating a different texture that experienced eyes will notice immediately. Too cool, and it won't take a clean impression, leaving blurred edges that scream forgery to anyone who knows what to look for. The seal stamp itself is a work of art. You didn't steal the original that would be crude and dangerous, but you've created a perfect replica based on your clay impression. The metalwork alone took you 3 weeks, carving each detail by hand with tools so small you need a magnifying glass to use them properly. The coat of arms includes 17 separate elements, each one requiring individual attention, each one needing to be precisely positioned to create the correct overall impression. The wax takes the impression beautifully, capturing every detail down to the tiny scratches on the original seal that tell the story of its age and use. You allow yourself a moment of professional satisfaction as you examine your work. Even under magnification, this seal would pass the most rigorous inspection. You've become very good at forgery, perhaps too good for your own safety. But as you prepare to return the letter to its original hiding place, tucked inside the binding of a religious text that sits innocuously on your shelf, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. There's a second watermark in the paper, almost invisible unless you hold it at exactly the right angle to the light. And this watermark you recognize immediately. It's your own mark, the subtle signature you've been incorporating into your work for the past 3 years, a tiny variation in the paper grain that identifies letters you've handled. But this letter was supposedly intercepted yesterday from a courier who claimed to have carried it directly from the German states. There's no way it should bear your mark unless someone is testing you, unless this entire elaborate charade, the complex folding pattern, the expensive wax, the dangerous political implications, has been designed specifically to see what you would do with sensitive information. The Council of 10 is famous for their paranoia, and they're equally famous for their willingness to eliminate potential security risks. Your hands are shaking now as you examine the letter more carefully. The love affair described in the text is real. You know the people involved, you've seen them together at social gatherings, but the specific details, the timing, the political implications, all of it could have been carefully crafted to create the perfect test case. Give the letter folder something irresistibly scandalous, something that would tempt anyone to gossip or leverage the information for personal gain, and see what happens. The morning light is stronger now, streaming through your workshop window and illuminating the intricate dance of dust motes in the air. Each particle of dust represents a potential security risk, a tiny piece of evidence that could link you to correspondence you're not supposed to acknowledge. You sweep your workspace obsessively, burning every scrap of practice paper, every drop of experimental wax, every tool that might have picked up residue from your work. Your cat watches this ritual with the patient superiority that cats reserve for human foolishness. Cicero has seen this routine dozens of times, and he's learned to stay out of the way during your cleaning frenzies. He also serves as your early warning system. His exceptional hearing alerts you to footsteps on the stairs long before human ears would notice. In your profession, a good cat is worth more than expensive tools. The knock on your door comes exactly at the time you've learned to expect it. 3 sharp raps, followed by 2 softer ones, followed by a pause, and then a single firm knock. The council's signature, letting you know this is official business rather than a social call. You compose your face into an expression of mild curiosity as you open the door, though your heart is hammering against your ribs. The man standing in your doorway is someone you've never seen before, which is either very good news or very bad news. He's dressed in the dark, high-quality cloth that marks him as government, but his hands are soft and ink-stained, suggesting a career spent with documents rather than weapons. An administrator, then, rather than an enforcer. This distinction could mean the difference between a bonus payment and a swift trip to the bottom of the nearest canal. Master Benedetto, he says, using the professional name you've adopted for your correspondence work. I trust you've had a productive morning. His eyes sweep your workshop, taking in the perfectly organized tools, the spotless work surface, the complete absence of any evidence that you've been working with sensitive materials. He nods approvingly at what he sees or doesn't see. Quite productively, you reply, matching his formal tone, though I fear the quality of correspondence has declined recently. So much careless folding, so little attention to proper sealing techniques. It makes one wonder about the education of modern scribes. This is code, of course. You're telling him that you've been handling amateur work, nothing that required your full expertise. He's telling you that your morning's work was satisfactory, that you passed whatever tests they set for you. The dance of professional discretion continues. Indeed, he agrees, producing a small leather pouch from his coat. Though I'm told there are still craftsmen who maintain the old standards, artists who understand that true skill lies not in what one reveals, but in what one conceals. The pouch clinks softly as he sets it on your work table. Payment, then, and generous payment, judging by the sound. After he leaves, you allow yourself a moment of relief that quickly transforms into professional paranoia. The test is over, but there will be other tests. There are always other tests in Venice, where information is more valuable than gold, and where the ability to keep secrets is the most dangerous skill you can possess. You count the coins in the pouch, silver ducats, as expected, enough to live comfortably for another month. But more importantly, their condition tells you something about your standing with the council. These coins are freshly minted, still bearing the sharp edges and clear impressions that indicate they came directly from the government treasury, rather than circulating through general commerce. This is the council's way of telling you that you remain in their good graces, that your services continue to be valued. The rest of your day follows a familiar pattern. 3 more letters arrive through various channels. 1 delivered by a nervous-looking merchant, 1 left by a courier who vanishes before you can get a good look at him, and 1 that simply appears on your doorstep with no explanation of how it got there. Each presents its own challenges, its own opportunities to demonstrate the skills that have made you the most sought-after letter folder in Venice. The merchant's letter is straightforward commercial correspondence, but the folding pattern includes a hidden compartment containing a small sample of spices. Someone is smuggling goods through the mail, using your services to conceal contraband within seemingly innocent business communications. You make note of the technique. It's clever, using the natural stiffness of folded paper to create a rigid container for small objects. The courier's letter is more complex, featuring what you recognize as a cascade lock, a folding pattern that can only be opened by following a specific sequence derived from the text itself. The first word of each paragraph provides a number, and these numbers indicate the order in which the folds should be released. It's an elegant system, though it requires the sender and recipient to agree on the code in advance. The mysterious letter that appeared on your doorstep is the most challenging of the day. The paper is wrong, too smooth, too white, suggesting it comes from outside Venice, possibly from the new paper mills in Germany. The folding pattern is unfamiliar, incorporating techniques you've never seen before. Most intriguingly, the letter appears to be addressed to you personally, though you can't imagine who would send you correspondence through such elaborate channels. When you finally manage to decode the folding pattern, a process that takes nearly 2 hours and requires you to reconstruct the logic from first principles, the contents are even more puzzling. It's a job offer, written in precise Latin, from someone who signs themselves only as a friend of scholarship. They're offering you a position in what they describe as a library of unique collections somewhere in the Holy Roman Empire. The offer is tempting. They're proposing to pay you nearly 10 times what you earn in Venice, plus providing housing and access to what they describe as the finest collection of manuscripts in Europe. But the very existence of this letter represents a massive security breach. Your work with the Council of 10 is supposed to be completely confidential. The fact that someone outside Venice knows about your skills and abilities suggests either a leak in the Council's security or surveillance capabilities that extend far beyond what you thought possible. You spend the evening walking through Venice's maze of canals and bridges, trying to think through the implications of the mysterious offer. The city at night is a different creature from its daytime self, shadows that conceal rather than reveal, sounds that whisper rather than proclaim, a place where secrets feel at home rather than hunted. Your route takes you past the Doge's palace, where lights burn late in windows that overlook the lagoon. Someone up there is working through the night, processing the same kinds of correspondence that crossed your table today. You wonder if they know about the mysterious letter, if they're testing you again, if this is all part of some elaborate game whose rules you don't understand. The offer from the German library haunts your thoughts as you make your way home. It represents everything you've dreamed of. A chance to work with truly important documents, to study techniques from across Europe, to develop your skills beyond the crude necessities of espionage work. But it also represents the end of your life in Venice, the abandonment of everything you've built here. Back in your workshop, you prepare for bed with the same meticulous care you bring to your professional work. Every tool cleaned and returned to its proper place. Every surface wiped down, every trace of the day's work eliminated. Tomorrow will bring new letters, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate the peculiar combination of artistry and paranoia that defines your profession. But tonight, as you lie in your narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the canal below your window, you're thinking about the delicate balance that governs your life. You're valuable to the Council of 10 precisely because you possess skills that could be turned against them. You're trusted with their secrets because you've proven your discretion, but that same discretion makes you a potential security risk. The letter from Germany represents a way out of this paradox, but it also represents a leap into the unknown. You've built a reputation in Venice through years of careful work, established relationships that protect you, developed instincts that keep you alive in a dangerous profession. Starting over somewhere else would mean abandoning all of that accumulated safety. Your last thought before sleep is about the nature of secrets themselves. In your work, you've learned that secrets are living things. They grow and change, they connect to other secrets, they develop their own momentum and direction. The letter you opened this morning will spawn other letters, other tests, other opportunities for trust and betrayal. The mysterious offer from Germany is itself a secret that will demand responses, decisions, actions that will shape your future in ways you can't yet imagine. Tomorrow you'll wake before dawn, descend to your workshop, and begin another day of transforming secrets into silence. But tonight, for just a few hours, you can rest in the knowledge that you've mastered one of the most essential skills of your age, the ability to handle dangerous information without being destroyed by it. In Venice, where knowledge is power and power is survival, that's no small accomplishment. You wake in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of church bells, but it's not the time that matters, it's the rhythm. 7 strikes, pause, 3 strikes, pause, 1 strike. That's the signal from Brother Marcus at St. Bartholomew's that the Flemish merchants have arrived early and are already setting up their stalls in the square. Your heart sinks because this means Thomas the Pepper King has probably beaten you to the best saffron, and without quality saffron, your day is going to be a disaster of disappointed customers and lost profits. You roll out of your straw mattress and immediately stub your toe on the iron weight that serves as both your most valuable possession and your constant source of anxiety. The weight, a supposedly standardized pound measure that you bought from a dealer in London 3 years ago, cost you more than most people earn in a month, and you're still not entirely sure it's accurate. In the world of medieval spice trading, a difference of even a few grains can mean the difference between profit and bankruptcy, and everyone's weights seem to disagree with everyone else's. The first challenge of your day is getting dressed in the dark without waking your wife and 3 children who share the single room above your shop. Your clothing tells the story of your profession: a leather apron stained with turmeric and cinnamon, breeches that smell permanently of cloves, and a woolen shirt that's been darned so many times it's more thread than original fabric. Your hands are permanently stained yellow-brown from handling saffron and curry powders, and no amount of scrubbing with lye soap will ever make them look clean. The streets are already bustling with activity as you make your way to the market square. Medieval towns don't really sleep, they just shift into different rhythms as night workers give way to day workers. The bakers have been up since midnight, the butchers since 2, and now the general merchants are stirring to life. The air is thick with smoke from countless cooking fires and the distinctive smell of a town that doesn't have adequate sewage systems, but your nose has learned to filter through these background odors to detect the subtle perfumes that mean business. You can smell pepper before you see it, that sharp, clean bite that cuts through everything else. The cinnamon too, sweet and woody, and the mysterious complexity of what the Arabian traders call baharat, but refuse to explain in detail. Your trained nose can distinguish between Ceylon cinnamon and the cheap acacia bark that dishonest dealers try to pass off as the real thing, and you can detect the musty undertone that means a shipment of cloves has gotten damp during transport. Your stall is nothing impressive to look at. A wooden table covered with a piece of oiled cloth, sheltered by a canvas awning that's seen better decades. But the real action happens underneath the table, where you keep your scales, weights, and the collection of small tools that represent years of hard-won expertise. Your primary scale is a simple balance beam suspended from a wooden frame, but you've modified it with adjustments that most of your competitors don't understand and wouldn't appreciate if they did. The art of weighing spices in a medieval market isn't just about putting product on one side of a scale and weights on the other. It's about understanding that every single transaction is a negotiation between multiple systems of measurement that don't agree with each other, conducted by people who have every incentive to cheat using equipment that's probably inaccurate in a legal environment where disputes are settled by whoever can shout loudest or swing hardest. Your first customer of the day is Brother Augustine from the monastery, and you know immediately that this is going to be a difficult transaction. Monks are simultaneously your best and worst customers. They pay reliably and don't try to cheat you, but they also know exactly what things should cost, and they're not shy about pointing out when your prices seem excessive. Brother Augustine needs cinnamon for the monastery's medicinal preparations, but he's also clearly been instructed to get the best possible deal. "Good morning, brother," you say, wiping down your scale with exaggerated care. "How much cinnamon were you hoping to purchase today?" This is a delicate dance. You need to establish the quantity first, because the price per unit changes dramatically based on how much someone is buying. A pinch of cinnamon for a merchant's wife costs 10 times more per weight than a pound of cinnamon for a monastery's kitchen. "We need enough for our winter preparations," Brother Augustine replies carefully. "Perhaps half a pound if the quality justifies the expense." He's already examining your cinnamon sticks, rolling them between his fingers to test their texture, sniffing them to check for freshness. Monks, you've learned, are surprisingly sophisticated customers when it comes to spices. Their medical training gives them knowledge that most lay people lack, and their communal purchasing power means they can afford to be selective. You select your finest cinnamon, bark that you personally inspected when it arrived from a Venetian trader 2 weeks ago, and begin the complex process of measuring out exactly half a pound. This is where your expertise becomes crucial, because half a pound means different things depending on which measurement system you're using. The monastery probably expects you to use the local town weights, but your supplier sold you this cinnamon by Venetian weights, which are lighter. The profit or loss on this transaction depends entirely on how you navigate this discrepancy. Your scale has been carefully calibrated using a set of standard weights that you had verified by 3 different merchants before accepting them as accurate. But accurate is a relative term in medieval commerce. Your weights agree with the official town standard, but the town standard disagrees with the regional standard, which disagrees with the royal standard, which probably disagrees with whatever standard was used, wherever this cinnamon originally came from. You place your half-pound weight on the right side of the scale and begin adding cinnamon bark to the left side. This is the moment when your years of experience become crucial. The weight of cinnamon bark varies significantly depending on its moisture content, and moisture content varies based on how it's been stored, how long it's been in transport, and even the weather on the day you're measuring it. A piece of bark that weighed exactly right in dry weather might be significantly heavier after a few damp days. Brother Augustine watches your every movement, and you know he's calculating whether he's getting fair value. Monks are taught to be suspicious of merchants, not without reason, considering how many merchants view monasteries as sources of easy profit. You add bark carefully, piece by piece, until the scale balances perfectly. Then you add one more small piece, tipping the scale slightly in the customer's favor. This gesture costs you a tiny amount of profit, but it buys you something more valuable: reputation. "Excellent cinnamon," Brother Augustine observes, examining the bark you've selected. Ceylon rather than cassia, properly aged, minimal breakage. You're paying attention to quality. This is high praise from a monk, and you feel a flush of professional pride. Quality is expensive to maintain. It means turning down cheaper suppliers, rejecting shipments that don't meet your standards, and sometimes selling at lower margins to move inventory before it deteriorates. The payment negotiation is its own art form. The monastery has silver, but silver coins come in bewildering variety, and each type has its own exchange rate that changes daily based on factors you don't entirely understand. Brother Augustine offers you a mixture of local silver pennies and foreign coins, German pfennigs, French deniers, and something that might be from the Low Countries, but could equally well be a clever forgery. You examine each coin carefully, checking for the telltale signs of clipping, filing, or counterfeiting that could leave you holding worthless metal. The German pfennigs are particularly suspect. There's a rumour going around that someone in the next town over has been producing very convincing forgeries using silver-plated lead. You test each suspicious coin by dropping it on your scales metal platform, listening for the clear ring of pure silver versus the dull thunk of base metal. After Brother Augustine leaves, satisfied with his purchase, you're faced with the day's real challenge, the arrival of Master William, who runs the largest tavern in town and is both your best customer and your most difficult one. Master William buys spices in large quantities, which means substantial profit for you, but he also knows exactly what things cost everywhere else within a 50-mile radius, and he's not above playing suppliers against each other to get better prices. "Good morning, William," you say, already preparing yourself for what you know will be a complex negotiation. "I've got some excellent pepper that just arrived from the Flemish traders. Very fine grind, strong aroma, barely any dust or debris." You're already mentally calculating margins, trying to figure out the minimum price you can accept while still making the transaction worthwhile. Master William examines your pepper with the practiced eye of someone who's been cheated by spice merchants before. He takes a pinch and rubs it between his fingers, checking for the gritty texture that indicates sand has been added to increase weight. He sniffs it carefully, looking for the musty smell that means the pepper has been stored in damp conditions. Most importantly, he tastes it, checking for the sharp heat that distinguishes good pepper from the inferior grades that dishonest merchants try to pass off as premium product. "It's acceptable," he says grudgingly, which in Master William's vocabulary is equivalent to enthusiastic praise. "How much for £10? This is where the real negotiation begins, because £10 of pepper represents a major transaction that will significantly impact your monthly income. You need to balance several competing factors: your cost for the pepper, your overhead expenses, the current market conditions, and your assessment of Master William's willingness to pay. The process of weighing £10 of pepper reveals all the complexities and contradictions of medieval measurement. You start by placing your £10 weight on the right side of your scale, but immediately realize that this transaction is going to require multiple weighings. Your scale simply isn't large enough to handle £10 at once, which means you'll need to weigh the pepper in smaller batches and hope that your measurements remain consistent across multiple weighings. This is where the art of medieval spice measurement becomes truly complex. Each time you reset your scale, you introduce the possibility of small errors that can accumulate across multiple weighings. Your scale might be perfectly accurate for £1 measurements, but slightly off for £5 measurements due to the mechanical stress of handling larger weights. The pepper itself settles and compacts as you handle it, meaning that a pound of pepper measured first thing in the morning might weigh differently by afternoon. You develop a rhythm: scoop, weigh, adjust, record, repeat. Each weighing requires careful attention to make sure the scale is properly balanced before you add pepper and after you remove the measured amount. Master William watches this process with professional interest, occasionally asking questions about your technique or making observations about the quality of individual batches. Halfway through the measuring process, you encounter a problem that perfectly illustrates the challenges of medieval commerce. One batch of pepper appears to be significantly lighter than the others, despite looking identical. This could mean several things. The pepper might have been stored in a drier location, reducing its moisture content. It might be a different grade that was mixed in with your premium stock, or it might indicate that your scale is becoming inaccurate due to wear or environmental factors. You pause the transaction to investigate, carefully examining the suspect pepper and comparing it to previous batches. The color is slightly different, more brown than black, suggesting this pepper came from a different source or was processed differently. The aroma is also subtly different, with less of the sharp bite that characterizes top-quality pepper. This is clearly inferior product that somehow got mixed in with your premium stock. The ethical dilemma is immediate and clear. You could continue with the transaction, accepting that Master William will receive a mixture of premium and inferior pepper at premium prices. This would maximize your profit and might not even be noticed by the customer until much later. Alternatively, you could acknowledge the quality issue, separate out the inferior pepper, and complete the transaction using only premium product at premium prices. Your decision reveals everything about your character and your business philosophy. You choose honesty, explaining the situation to Master William and offering to complete the transaction using only the premium pepper. This costs you some immediate profit, but it reinforces your reputation as a trustworthy merchant. In medieval commerce, reputation is more valuable than money, because reputation determines whether you'll have customers next month. Master William nods approvingly at your honesty. "This is why I do business with you," he says. "Half the merchants in this town would have sold me inferior pepper at premium prices and hoped I wouldn't notice until it was too late to complain." He's right, of course. The medieval marketplace operates on a complex balance of trust and suspicion, where honest dealing is both rare and highly valued. The final weighing goes smoothly, and you end up with exactly 10 pounds of premium pepper, carefully measured and double-checked. The payment process is similarly complex. Master William pays partly in silver coins and partly in trade goods. He offers you a bolt of good woolen cloth in partial payment, cloth that he received from a customer who couldn't pay his tavern bill in cash. This kind of barter transaction is common in medieval commerce, but it requires you to make quick assessments of the value and marketability of goods outside your area of expertise. You examine the cloth carefully, checking for moth holes, stains, or other defects that would reduce its value. The weave is tight and even, the color is rich and uniform, and the material feels substantial in your hands. You estimate that you can sell this cloth to the local tailor for approximately the same value as the silver coins it's replacing, so you accept it as part of the payment. As the morning progresses, you handle dozens of smaller transactions that collectively illustrate the full complexity of medieval spice measurement. A merchant's wife wants a handful of cloves, which turns out to mean something completely different from what you expected. A ship captain needs enough nutmeg to last 6 weeks at sea, which requires you to make calculations about consumption rates, storage conditions, and the likelihood that the spices will remain fresh during a long voyage. Each transaction requires you to navigate between different measurement systems, assess the quality and value of various forms of payment, and make quick judgments about customer trustworthiness and price sensitivity. You develop techniques for handling each type of customer: flattery for the merchant wives, technical discussions for the monks, hard bargaining for the professional traders. The most challenging customer of the day is a foreign merchant who speaks limited English and appears to be operating with a completely different understanding of weights and measures. He wants saffron, but his gestures suggest he's thinking in terms of some measurement system you don't recognize. Through a combination of broken English, hand gestures, and careful demonstration, you eventually determine that he's accustomed to buying saffron by a Persian measurement that doesn't correspond to anything in your experience. This negotiation requires you to essentially create a new measurement standard on the spot, using visual references and physical demonstrations to establish mutual understanding. You end up measuring the saffron into small piles, with the customer indicating approval or requesting adjustments, until you arrive at a quantity that satisfies his needs. The entire process takes nearly an hour and attracts a crowd of curious onlookers who find the cross-cultural measurement negotiation entertaining. By midday, Your back is aching from bending over your scale. Your hands are cramped from handling small weights and delicate spices, and your throat is dry from inhaling spice dust all morning. But you've also conducted enough successful transactions to ensure that your family will eat well this week and that you'll have enough profit to restock your inventory when the next trading caravan arrives. The afternoon brings different challenges. The quality of light changes as the sun moves across the sky, making it harder to assess the color and appearance of spices accurately. The temperature rises, causing some spices to release more aromatic oils, while making others more brittle and prone to breakage. Your scale, which was perfectly balanced in the cool morning air, begins to behave differently as the metal expands in the heat. You also begin to notice the cumulative effects of a day spent handling small particles and fine powders. Your eyes water from exposure to pepper and mustard seed dust. Your nose, initially sharp enough to detect subtle differences between similar spices, becomes less sensitive as it becomes overwhelmed by constant exposure to strong aromas. Your fingers, stained and slightly numb from handling acidic spices like sumac and tamarind, lose some of their sensitivity to texture and weight. These physical challenges are part of why spice measurement is considered a skilled trade rather than simple manual labor. You've learned to compensate for changing conditions throughout the day, adjusting your techniques and standards to maintain accuracy despite fatigue and environmental factors. You've also learned to recognize when your judgment is becoming impaired and to take breaks before making expensive mistakes. The day's final major transaction involves a group of pilgrims who are preparing for a long journey and need portable, long-lasting spices for cooking and medicinal purposes. This requires a completely different kind of expertise, knowledge of which spices travel well, how to package them for maximum shelf life, and how to balance cost against utility for people operating on limited budgets. You recommend ginger root for settling stomachs, dried mint for digestive issues, and a carefully balanced mixture of preservation spices that will help keep their food safe during weeks of travel. Each recommendation requires you to consider not just the immediate needs of the customers, but also the practical realities of medieval travel, limited storage space, exposure to weather, and the need for spices that will remain effective even under adverse conditions. As evening approaches and you begin to pack up your stall, you reflect on the peculiar nature of your profession. You're simultaneously a chemist, understanding how different spices interact with each other and with food, a mathematician, calculating weights, measures, and exchange rates, a diplomat, negotiating between customers with conflicting interests and expectations, and a detective, constantly assessing the authenticity and quality of products in a marketplace full of potential deception. Your daily income represents dozens of small victories, successful negotiations, satisfied customers, accurate measurements, and fair exchanges. But it also represents constant vigilance against the countless ways that medieval commerce can go wrong. A single mistake in measurement could wipe out a day's profit. A bad batch of spices could destroy your reputation. A dishonest customer could leave you holding worthless counterfeit coins. Yet, there's also deep satisfaction in mastering such a complex and essential trade. Spices don't just add flavor to food, they preserve it, making long-term storage possible. They provide medicine, treating everything from indigestion to serious illnesses. They represent connections to distant lands and exotic cultures, bringing a touch of the wider world to your small medieval town. As you carry your equipment home through the darkening streets, you're already thinking about tomorrow's challenges. A new shipment of Eastern spices is expected to arrive from the Flemish traders, including some varieties you've never handled before. You'll need to learn their characteristics, establish fair pricing, and figure out how to measure and sell them accurately. But tonight, you'll count your day's earnings, update your records, and plan your inventory purchases for the coming week. You'll also spend time maintaining your equipment, cleaning your scales, checking your weights for accuracy, and organizing your tools for maximum efficiency. In a profession where precision matters and mistakes are expensive, these maintenance routines aren't optional luxuries. They're essential survival skills that separate successful merchants from failed ones. You wake before dawn, not to birdsong or church bells, but to the acrid smell of yesterday's tallow, still clinging to your clothes, your hair, your very skin. The scent has worked its way so deeply into the fabric of your life that you taste it in your morning bread and smell it in your dreams. Your wife has long since stopped complaining about the smell. After 12 years of marriage to a candle maker, she's learned that the odour of rendered animal fat is simply the price you pay for keeping Rome's temples, bathhouses, and wealthy homes illuminated through the dark hours. The workshop attached to your modest home near the Campus Martius is already warm from the fires that never fully die. Keeping the rendering pots at the right temperature is a delicate balance. Too hot and the tallow burns, producing candles that smoke terribly and smell even worse. Too cool and the fat doesn't render properly, leaving you with candles that sputter and drip more than they illuminate. You've learnt through years of expensive mistakes that maintaining consistent heat requires constant attention, which is why you sleep so lightly and wake so often during the night to check the fires. Your first task is always the same: examining yesterday's batch of candles to see which ones are acceptable for sale and which need to be melted down and remade. This morning's inspection reveals the usual mixture of successes and failures. About half the candles have the smooth, even surface and clean burn that your better customers expect. The rest show various defects: air bubbles that will cause uneven burning, wicks that weren't properly centered, or the subtle discoloration that means the tallow wasn't pure enough. The failed candles go back into the rendering pot, because in your business, nothing is ever truly wasted. Even the most badly made candle can be melted down and reformed, though each remelting process degrades the quality slightly. You've learned to keep careful track of how many times each batch of tallow has been reprocessed, because customers can tell the difference, and your reputation depends on consistent quality. Your raw materials arrive in forms that would horrify anyone not familiar with your trade. The tallow comes from the city's butchers in chunks of congealed fat, often still containing bits of meat, blood, and other organic matter that must be carefully removed before rendering. The smell of fresh tallow is actually worse than the smell of properly rendered fat. It's the sweet, cloying odour of decay mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy smell of an animal that was alive just days ago. The rendering process itself is part chemistry, part art, and part endurance test. You heat the raw fat slowly in large iron cauldrons, stirring constantly to prevent burning while skimming off the impurities that rise to the surface. The process takes hours and requires continuous attention, because a moment's inattention can ruin an entire batch. The workshop fills with steam and smoke that makes your eyes water and your throat roar, but you've learned to work through the discomfort, because stopping to rest means starting over. As the morning progresses, you're joined by your apprentice Marcus, a 12-year-old boy whose enthusiasm for the trade is matched only by his talent for making mistakes at the worst possible moments. Teaching Marcus the craft requires patience you didn't know you possessed, because candle making looks simple from the outside, but involves countless subtle techniques that can only be learned through experience and repetition. The tallow is ready for testing, Marcus announces, clearly proud of his ability to recognize the signs. He's right. The fat has rendered to a clear, golden liquid with the consistency of honey, and the surface no longer shows the bubbling that indicates moisture content. But when you test the temperature by dropping a small amount onto a cool stone, you can tell immediately that Marcus has let the heat get too high. The tallow hardens with the slightly brittle texture that means it will crack in cold weather. This is exactly the kind of teachable moment that makes apprenticeship so valuable. You could simply correct the temperature and move on, but Marcus needs to understand why temperature control matters and how to recognize the subtle signs that indicate problems before they become expensive disasters. You spend the next hour walking him through the process of adjusting the heat and explaining how different temperatures affect the final product's texture, burn rate, and durability. Your customer base represents a cross-section of Roman society, each with different needs and expectations that require you to produce several grades of candles simultaneously. The temples need large ceremonial candles that burn for hours without smoking or dripping wax onto sacred surfaces. The wealthy patrician families want elegant, clean-burning candles for their dinner parties and evening entertainments. The middle-class merchants and shopkeepers need functional, affordable candles for everyday lighting. And then there are the special orders, custom sizes, colors or scents for particular occasions or religious ceremonies. The most challenging customer is probably Gaius Aurelius, who manages lighting for one of Rome's largest bathhouses. His requirements are exacting. The candles must produce enough light for customers to navigate safely in the evening, but they can't produce smoke that would make the humid environment even more unpleasant. They need to burn consistently, despite the moisture in the air, and they must be economical enough that the bathhouse can afford to keep them lit for extended hours. Meeting Gaius's requirements has pushed you to develop techniques that go far beyond basic candle making. You've experimented with different ratios of beef and sheep tallow, discovering that a mixture produces candles that burn more cleanly than either fat alone. You've learned to add small amounts of beeswax to improve burn quality, though beeswax is expensive enough that you can only use it for premium customers. Most importantly, you've developed a technique for creating wicks that burn at exactly the right rate. Too fast and the candle wastes fuel, too slow and it produces smoke and uneven light. The wick-making process alone represents years of accumulated expertise. You start with linen threads, but not just any linen. It needs to be a specific weight and weave that will burn steadily without producing excessive smoke. The threads must be twisted together with exactly the right tension to create a wick that draws fuel efficiently from the surrounding tallow. Too loose and the wick burns too quickly, too tight and it doesn't draw enough fuel, causing the flame to sputter and die. Different candle sizes require different wick configurations, and you've developed an almost instinctive sense of how thick the wick needs to be for any given candle diameter. A wick that's perfect for a small votive candle will be completely inadequate for a large ceremonial candle. And the relationship between wick size and candle size isn't linear. It requires understanding how the flame's heat affects the surrounding tallow and how the melted wax pools around the wick. By midday, the workshop has become almost unbearably hot from the combination of rendering fires and the warm Roman sun beating down on the roof. Your clothes are soaked with sweat that mixes unpleasantly with the tallow vapors that coat everything in the workshop. Marcus has stripped down to just his tunic, and even then he looks like he's about to collapse from the heat. This is the part of candle making that nobody talks about. It's physically demanding work that takes place in conditions that would be considered torture in any other context. The afternoon brings the delicate process of actually forming the candles, which requires perfect timing and coordination between you and Marcus. The tallow must be at exactly the right temperature, hot enough to flow smoothly, but cool enough that it doesn't melt the wick or create air bubbles. You've developed a system where Marcus prepares the wicks and molds while you monitor the tallow temperature and handle the actual pouring. Your candle molds are made of clay, carved and shaped by hand to produce candles of specific sizes and proportions. Each mold represents a significant investment of time and money, and they're carefully maintained because replacing them would mean weeks of work and lost income. The molds must be perfectly clean and lightly oiled to prevent the candles from sticking, but too much oil will affect the candle's surface texture and burn quality. The pouring process itself is almost meditative when everything goes right. You ladle the hot tallow into each mold with smooth, steady movements, filling them to exactly the right level while ensuring that the wick remains perfectly centered. The tallow settles with a satisfying hiss, and you can judge the quality of each candle by the sound it makes as it cools. Good candles cool with barely audible crackling sounds. Bad candles pop and snap as air bubbles form or as impurities in the tallow create weak spots. But today, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. The first batch of candles develops air bubbles because Marcus forgot to warm the molds before pouring. The second batch has wicks that shift off center because the tallow was too hot and caused the linen to move. The third batch looks perfect until you realize that Marcus used the wrong grade of tallow. The batch intended for temple candles has been mixed with the cheaper fat meant for everyday household candles. Each mistake means starting over, remelting the tallow, cleaning the molds, and losing hours of work. By the time you finally produce a batch of acceptable candles, the sun is setting, and you're exhausted, frustrated, and questioning whether Marcus will ever develop the precision and attention to detail that the trade requires. But then you remember your own early days as an apprentice, when your master probably felt the same way about your countless mistakes and seemingly hopeless incompetence. The evening brings a different kind of work, delivering finished candles to customers and negotiating orders for future production. This aspect of the business requires skills that have nothing to do with candle making, but everything to do with survival in Rome's competitive marketplace. You need to understand your customers' businesses well enough to anticipate their needs, negotiate prices that allow you to make a profit while remaining competitive, and maintain relationships that will keep customers coming back even when cheaper alternatives are available. Your first stop is the Temple of Vesta, where the priests have very specific requirements for the candles used in their sacred ceremonies. These candles must be made from the finest materials, burn without producing smoke that would interfere with ritual activities, and maintain consistent flames that won't suddenly flicker or die during important ceremonies. The priests are willing to pay premium prices for candles that meet their standards, but they're also extremely demanding customers who will reject entire orders if they detect any quality issues. The head priest examines your candles with the careful attention of someone whose reputation depends on the reliability of his suppliers. He tests the surface texture with his fingers, sniffs each candle to check for off odors, and even lights one to observe how it burns. Only after this thorough inspection does he accept the delivery and authorize payment. The money he pays represents a significant portion of your monthly income, but earning it requires maintaining quality standards that push your skills to their limits. Your next stop is Gaius Aurelius at the bathhouse, where the atmosphere couldn't be more different from the temple's formal ceremonies. The bathhouse operates as a business, and Gaius evaluates your candles based on purely practical considerations: how long they burn, how much light they produce, and how much they cost. He's not interested in perfect craftsmanship if it doesn't translate into better value for his customers. These had better burn cleaner than the last batch, Gaius says, examining the candles with the skeptical eye of someone who's been disappointed by suppliers before. I had 3 customers complain about smoke last week, and I can't afford to lose business because your candles are making people cough. This is the constant pressure of commercial candle making. Your products don't just need to work, they need to work consistently and reliably in real-world conditions where failure affects other people's livelihoods. The negotiation over next month's order reveals the complex economics of your trade. Gaius wants to increase his order by 30% to accommodate expanded evening hours, but he also wants a volume discount that would reduce your per-candle profit margin. You need to calculate whether the increased volume will offset the reduced margins, while also considering your capacity constraints and the availability of raw materials. This kind of business calculation requires skills that no one teaches apprentice candle makers. You need to understand seasonal variations in tallow prices, predict changes in customer demand, and maintain enough working capital to purchase raw materials weeks before you'll be paid for the finished products. A single miscalculation could leave you unable to fulfill orders or force you to sell candles at a loss. Your final stop of the evening is a wealthy patrician household where you're delivering custom-scented candles for a dinner party. These candles are made with imported beeswax and scented with expensive oils from the East, representing the luxury end of your product line. The lady of the house examines each candle as if it were a piece of jewelry, checking for perfect symmetry and flawless surface finish. The conversation reveals how differently wealthy customers think about candles compared to your commercial clients. For them, candles are decorative objects that contribute to the ambience of social events. They care about appearance, scent, and the social status that comes from using expensive, high-quality products. Price is almost irrelevant. They're willing to pay 10 times more for candles that look and smell better, even if they don't actually provide better lighting. This customer segment requires you to be part craftsman and part artist, creating products that function as both practical lighting and luxury objects. You've learned to work with colored waxes, exotic scents, and decorative elements that have nothing to do with the candle's primary function, but everything to do with its perceived value. It's a completely different set of skills from commercial candle making, but the profit margins make it worth the effort. Walking home through Rome's darkened streets, you're surrounded by the products of your trade. Candles flicker in shop windows, illuminate temple ceremonies, and provide the warm light that makes evening social gatherings possible. Every candle represents hours of skilled labor, from rendering the raw tallow to forming the finished product. Yet most people who use your candles have no idea of the complexity involved in creating something that seems so simple and obvious. The physical toll of a day in the candle-making trade is considerable. Your hands are burned and scarred from handling hot wax and metal tools. Your back aches from bending over rendering pots and molds. Your lungs are irritated from inhaling tallow vapors and smoke. Your eyes water constantly from exposure to heat and chemical fumes. This is hard, dangerous work that ages you prematurely and leaves permanent marks on your body. But there's also deep satisfaction in mastering a craft that combines ancient techniques with personal innovation. You've developed methods and recipes that are uniquely yours, accumulated through years of experimentation and refinement. Your reputation in Rome's marketplace reflects not just your technical skills, but your reliability, honesty, and attention to customer needs. In a city where thousands of craftsmen compete for business, you've carved out a niche based on consistent quality and professional service. Back in your workshop, you spend the evening preparing for tomorrow's work. The rendering pots need to be cleaned and recharged with fresh tallow. The molds require inspection and maintenance. Your tools need sharpening and oiling. Marcus needs instruction on techniques he's struggling to master. The business records need updating with today's sales and expenses. This administrative work is essential but tedious, the kind of detail that can make or break a small business. As you finally prepare for bed, your clothes still reeking of tallow despite multiple washings, you're thinking about the orders that need to be filled tomorrow and the challenges that await. The temple has requested an unusually large order for an upcoming festival. Gaius wants to discuss changing his candle specifications to reduce costs. The patrician lady mentioned a friend who might need custom candles for a wedding celebration. Each opportunity represents potential profit, but also potential problems. Large orders strain your production capacity and tie up working capital. Custom work is profitable, but unpredictable, requiring skills and materials you might not have readily available. Commercial clients offer steady income, but demand competitive pricing that limits your profit margins. Your last thought before sleep is about Marcus and whether he'll develop into a skilled craftsman or remain a liability who costs more than he contributes. Training apprentices is part of your responsibility to the trade, but it's also a significant investment of time and resources. Marcus shows promise, but promise doesn't automatically translate into competence, and you can't afford to carry an apprentice indefinitely if he doesn't develop the skills the trade requires. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, technical problems to solve, customers to satisfy, and the endless process of maintaining quality while controlling costs. But tonight, you can rest knowing that you've mastered one of Rome's essential crafts, providing the light that makes civilization possible after the sun goes down. In a world without electric lighting, your candles don't just illuminate darkness, they extend the useful hours of each day, making evening commerce, entertainment, and social interaction possible. That's not a small contribution to the life of the world's greatest city. You wake in your narrow cell, not to the sound of birds or church bells, but to the gentle scratching of mice in the walls and the distant sound of Brother Columba's snoring, echoing through the stone corridors. The darkness is absolute, not the soft darkness of a modern bedroom, but the complete, consuming blackness of a world without electric lighting, where even the faintest glimmer of dawn is still hours away. Your straw mattress has developed a depression exactly the shape of your body after 8 years of the same sleeping position, and you know without looking that there's frost on the inside of your single small window. The rule of Saint Benedict governs every moment of your life, but as the monastery's librarian, you've been granted certain privileges that would make your fellow monks envious if they knew about them. You're allowed to rise slightly earlier than the others to prepare the scriptorium for the day's work, which means you get a few precious minutes alone with the manuscripts before the copying work begins. These solitary moments with the books have become essential to your sanity, a brief respite from the communal life that defines monastic existence. Your first task is always lighting the oil lamps in the scriptorium, a process that requires more skill than you'd expect. The lamp oil is expensive, rationed carefully by the abbot, and wasting even a drop represents a betrayal of your vows of poverty and stewardship. The wicks must be trimmed to exactly the right length to provide adequate light without producing smoke that would damage the precious manuscripts. Too much flame creates dangerous heat that could dry out parchment and make it brittle. Too little light makes copying work impossible and strains the eyes beyond endurance. The scriptorium itself is the monastery's greatest treasure, though visitors would probably find it disappointingly modest. The room is barely 20 feet square, with thick stone walls that provide insulation against both cold and the dampness that is parchment's greatest enemy. 4 wooden desks occupy the center of the space, each equipped with a slanted writing surface, an oil lamp, and carefully arranged tools, quills, ink horns, pumice stones for smoothing parchment, and the small knives used for scraping away mistakes. But the real treasure lies in the wooden chests that line the walls. each one containing manuscripts that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. These aren't just religious texts, though those form the majority of the collection. You also safeguard works on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy, knowledge that would be lost forever if not for the dedication of monastic librarians like yourself. Each manuscript has been hand-copied by monks working in scriptoriums across Europe, and many contain unique information that exists nowhere else in the world. Your morning routine includes checking each manuscript chest for signs of moisture, insect damage, or other threats that could destroy months or years of copying work. This inspection reveals the constant battle you fight against entropy itself. Parchment made from animal skins remains vulnerable to the very life it once supported. Mice view it as food, insects see it as nesting material, and mold treats it as a perfect growing medium. Every day that a manuscript survives is a small victory against the forces that want to return it to dust. This morning's inspection reveals a crisis that makes your heart sink. One of the chests containing medical texts shows clear signs of moisture damage. The wood is slightly swollen, and you can detect the musty smell that means mold has begun to grow. Opening the chest confirms your worst fears. 3 manuscripts show spots of green and black mold that, if left untreated, will consume the parchment within weeks. The next few hours become a desperate race to save knowledge that took decades to accumulate. You carefully remove each affected manuscript, using a soft brush to remove surface mold, while praying that the damage hasn't penetrated deep into the parchment. The process requires extraordinary delicacy. Too much pressure, and you'll tear pages that are already weakened by moisture. Too little, and the mold will continue to spread. Brother Finian, who serves as the monastery's head scribe, arrives as you're working on a particularly valuable medical treatise that contains information about surgical procedures. "How bad is the damage?" he asks, and you can hear the anxiety in his voice. This manuscript represents 5 years of copying work, and replacing it would require obtaining another copy from a monastery in France, assuming such a copy still exists. "Salvageable, I think," you reply, though you're not entirely certain. Medieval manuscript preservation is as much art as science, requiring decisions based on experience and intuition rather than established procedures. You've seen manuscripts that looked completely ruined turn out to be recoverable, and others that seemed barely damaged prove to be total losses. The parchment's condition depends on factors you can't easily assess: the quality of the original preparation, the composition of the inks, the environmental conditions during storage. The salvage work reveals just how precarious manuscript preservation really is in the 12th century. You have no climate-controlled storage, no chemical treatments to prevent deterioration, no backup copies stored in separate locations. Every manuscript exists as a single, irreplaceable object that represents the only record of specific knowledge. When a manuscript is lost, the information it contains often dies with it, because the network of monasteries sharing texts is fragile and irregular. Your expertise as a librarian goes far beyond simply shelving books. You need to understand the physical properties of parchment and how it responds to different environmental conditions. You must recognize the symptoms of various types of damage and know appropriate treatments for each. Most importantly, you need to make triage decisions about which manuscripts are most important to preserve when resources are limited. The mold crisis consumes most of your morning, but by midday you've managed to stabilize the affected manuscripts. The medical treatise is saved, though some pages will require careful restoration work. 2 other texts have lost some pages entirely, but the remaining content is valuable enough to justify the space they occupy. This kind of partial loss is heartbreaking but common. You estimate that the monastery's collection loses about 10% of its content each decade to various forms of damage. The afternoon brings different challenges as the other monks arrive to begin their copying work. As librarian, you're responsible not just for preserving existing manuscripts, but for overseeing the creation of new ones. This requires you to balance multiple competing demands. Which texts are most important to copy? How do you allocate the limited supply of good parchment? Which scribes are skilled enough to work on the most valuable manuscripts? Today's copying schedule includes work on 3 different projects. Brother Columba is continuing his transcription of Augustine's Confessions, a project that has occupied him for nearly 2 years. Brother Aidan is working on a collection of Irish poetry, preserving traditional verses that exist only in oral tradition. Brother Mail is copying a mathematical treatise from Al-Khwarizmi, one of the few Arabic works in your collection. Each project presents unique challenges that fall under your responsibility as librarian. Augustine's Confessions requires the finest parchment and most experienced scribe because any errors would be considered sacrilege. The Irish poetry demands special attention to maintaining the original language and metre, since translation would destroy much of the text's value. The mathematical treatise includes complex diagrams that must be reproduced with absolute accuracy, requiring specialized skills that few scribes possess. Your role in supervising these projects requires diplomatic skills that weren't covered in your monastic training. Brother Columba is elderly and proud, resistant to suggestions about his work, despite increasing problems with eyesight that affect his accuracy. Brother Aidan is young and enthusiastic, but prone to taking shortcuts that compromise quality. Brother Mail is technically skilled but impatient with the slow pace of manuscript copying, occasionally rushing through sections in ways that introduce errors. The afternoon also brings visitors seeking access to the library's collection, and these interactions reveal the broader significance of your work. Today's visitor is a physician from Dublin who has heard rumours that your collection includes a medical text with information about treating plague. His visit illustrates how monastic libraries serve as repositories of practical knowledge that can literally mean the difference between life and death. "I've heard you have a copy of Ray's work on infectious diseases," the physician says, his manner respectful but urgent. "There are cases appearing in Dublin that match descriptions I've heard of the plague, and I need information about treatment methods." This is exactly the kind of request that makes your work feel essential rather than merely academic. The knowledge preserved in your manuscripts doesn't just satisfy scholarly curiosity, it provides tools for addressing real-world problems. Finding the requested text requires navigating the monastery's catalogue system, which exists entirely in your memory and in a few handwritten lists that are themselves precious documents. You've developed an almost instinctive sense of where different types of information are stored, but locating specific texts can still take considerable time. The organization system reflects medieval approaches to knowledge that don't always match modern expectations about logical categorization. The medical manuscript you eventually locate contains information that could indeed help combat plague, but accessing that information requires skills that go beyond simple reading. The text is written in Latin, mixed with Arabic terms, using abbreviations and conventions that would be incomprehensible to anyone not trained in medieval scholarly methods. Your role as librarian includes translating and interpreting these texts for visitors who lack the specialized knowledge required to use them effectively. The physician spends several hours copying relevant sections from the medical text, and his work illustrates both the value and the limitations of manuscript-based knowledge preservation. The information he's copying could save lives, but the process of accessing and reproducing it is so labor-intensive that only a tiny fraction of people who might benefit will ever see it. This is the fundamental challenge of pre-printing civilization. Valuable knowledge exists, but distributing it requires enormous investments of time and resources. Evening brings the most contemplative part of your day, when the other monks attend Vespers and you're left alone with the manuscripts. This is when you do your most important work, not the dramatic tasks of preservation and copying, but the quiet, steady labour of catalogue maintenance, condition assessment, and long-term planning. These activities require the kind of sustained concentration that's impossible during the communal hours of monastic life. Tonight you're working on updating the catalogue that records the monastery's holdings, a project that reveals the full scope and complexity of your collection. The monastery owns 127 complete manuscripts and 34 partial ones, representing knowledge from across the known world. Greek philosophical texts copied from Byzantine sources, Arabic scientific works acquired through Spanish connections, Anglo-Saxon historical chronicles, and Irish legal documents all coexist in your carefully maintained collection. Each catalogue entry requires detailed information about the manuscript's content, condition, provenance, and copying history. This documentation serves multiple purposes. It helps you locate specific texts quickly, provides information for scholars researching particular topics, and creates a record that would allow the collection to be reconstructed if disaster struck. The catalogue itself is a manuscript that must be preserved as carefully as any other text in the collection. The cataloguing work also reveals patterns and gaps in the monastery's holdings that influence your acquisition priorities. You have strong collections in theology and medicine, but lack important works on natural philosophy and mathematics. The monastery owns multiple copies of some popular texts, but has unique works that exist nowhere else. Understanding these patterns helps you make strategic decisions about which manuscripts to copy, which to acquire through exchanges with other monasteries, and which gaps in knowledge are most important to address. Your evening solitude with the manuscripts provides time for the kind of deep reading that's essential to your role as librarian but impossible during the day's practical activities. Tonight, you're studying a recently acquired text on astronomy that includes observations and calculations you don't fully understand. This isn't casual reading, it's professional development that increases your ability to help scholars and answer questions about the monastery's holdings. The astronomical text illustrates how monastic libraries serve as bridges between different intellectual traditions. The work combines Greek theoretical approaches with Arabic mathematical methods and includes observational data collected by scholars across Europe and the Middle East. Understanding this synthesis requires knowledge of multiple languages, mathematical systems, and cultural contexts. Exactly the kind of interdisciplinary expertise that librarians must develop. As you work by lamplight, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries, you're acutely aware of your responsibility as custodian of irreplaceable knowledge. Every manuscript in your care represents not just the labour of the scribes who copied it, but the intellectual achievements of authors who may have died centuries ago. You're the guardian of their thoughts, ensuring that their contributions to human understanding survive for future generations. The physical environment of your nighttime study perfectly captures the medieval relationship between knowledge and scarcity. The single oil lamp provides just enough light to read by, but reading requires holding the manuscript at exactly the right angle to catch the illumination. The cold stone walls remind you that intellectual work in the 12th century is always conducted under conditions of physical hardship. The silence is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat and the scratch of mice in the walls. This isolation also provides perspective on the broader significance of monastic libraries in medieval civilization. Without institutions like your monastery, the intellectual achievements of classical antiquity would have been lost entirely. Greek philosophy, Roman law, early Christian theology, and Islamic science survive only because monks like you, have dedicated their lives to copying, preserving, and transmitting texts across generations and cultures. But your work as a librarian also reveals the limitations and fragility of manuscript-based knowledge preservation. Every text in your collection exists as a single copy that could be destroyed by fire, flood, war, or simple neglect. The process of copying introduces errors that accumulate over generations, gradually corrupting the original texts. The network of monasteries that share manuscripts is vulnerable to political disruptions, religious conflicts, and economic changes that can isolate entire regions from the flow of knowledge. As you finally prepare for bed, carefully extinguishing the oil lamp and securing the manuscripts for the night, you're thinking about tomorrow's challenges. The mold-damaged texts will require continued treatment. The visiting physician will return with more questions about plague treatments, and Brother Aidan needs guidance on copying techniques for the Irish Poetry Project. Each task requires different skills and knowledge, but all share the common goal of preserving and transmitting human understanding across time and space. Your final thought before sleep is about the paradox of your calling. You've taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that separate you from the ordinary world, yet your work as librarian makes you essential to that world's intellectual life. You own nothing, yet you're responsible for treasures more valuable than gold. You live in isolation, yet you serve as a bridge connecting scholars across centuries and continents. Tomorrow will bring new threats to the manuscripts in your care, new requests from scholars seeking knowledge, and new opportunities to contribute to the great project of preserving human learning. But tonight, in the darkness of your cell, you can rest knowing that you've spent another day successfully protecting irreplaceable fragments of civilization itself. In an age when knowledge lives or dies based on the dedication of individual custodians, that's no small accomplishment.